My daughter-in-law looked me straight in the eyes and said, "We heard you bought a penthouse, so we will move in and make peace." She said it like it was a decision already made, like my home belonged to her, like I should be grateful for the privilege of being used again. My son stood behind her, silent eyes shifting anywhere but toward mine, as if he already knew the script she had prepared. They smiled as though nothing had ever happened, pretending the months of disrespect were nothing more than dust swept under a rug they expected me to carry for them. But as they stepped inside my penthouse, their smiles cracked, then vanished entirely. They froze. Not because of the view, not because of the size, not because of the luxury, but because of something far more unsettling. Something that told them immediately that everything they thought they controlled, every lie they believed, every advantage they counted on, was gone. In that instant, they realized they had walked into a place built on truth, not manipulation, and that for the first time, the power in this family no longer belonged to them. And as they stood there stunned, unable to speak, they had no idea that what awaited them would turn their confident smirks into fear that the peace they claimed to want would become the last excuse they would ever use, and that by the end of this story, every secret they tried to bury would rise, and every plan they made against me would collapse in front of them. Stay with me, because what happened next is something they never imagined and something they will never forget. My name is Roland Pierce. I am 70 years old, a retired civil engineer who spent 4 decades building bridges and highways across the Northeast. I lost my wife Margaret 2 years ago to cancer, and since then I have lived alone in the penthouse she always dreamed of owning. Sunday mornings used to belong to Margaret. She would stand by the window with her coffee watching the city wake up below, telling me how the light at that hour reminded her of the first apartment we shared when we were young and foolish, and so in love we couldn't see straight. Now I stand in her place holding her photograph instead of her hand, talking to her the way I've done every morning since the funeral. Some people might call that grief. I call it marriage. 43 years doesn't end just because one of us stopped breathing. I set the photograph back on the mantel and picked up the small watering can I keep beside the orchids. Margaret loved orchids. She said they were stubborn flowers, the kind that refused to bloom unless you treated them exactly right. I never had the patience for them when she was alive, but I learned after she was gone. Funny how death teaches you things love never could. The orchids sat in a row along the windowsill, their petals white and delicate, catching the morning light. I watered each one carefully, speaking to them the way Margaret used to, telling them they were beautiful, telling them to keep growing. It was a small ritual, maybe a foolish one, but it kept her close. The doorbell rang just as I finished. I wasn't expecting anyone. My Sundays were quiet, by design protected hours I spent with Margaret's memory and nothing else. I set down the watering can and walked to the door, my knees protesting the way they always did in the morning. When I opened it, I found my son Daniel standing in the hallway with his wife Vanessa beside him. I hadn't seen them in over 8 months. No calls, no visits, not even a card on my birthday. And now here they were, dressed like they were attending a business meeting, smiling like nothing had ever been wrong. "Dad?" Vanessa said, stepping forward before Daniel could speak. She kissed my cheek, her perfume sharp and expensive. "We heard about the penthouse. We thought it was time to reconnect as a family." I looked at Daniel. He stood slightly behind her, his shoulders hunched, his eyes fixed somewhere around my collarbone. He wouldn't meet my gaze. That told me everything I needed to know about whose idea this visit really was. "Come in," I said, because what else could I say? They were already moving past me before I finished the sentence. Vanessa walked through the penthouse like she was conducting an inspection. She touched the back of the leather sofa, ran her fingers along the granite countertop, opened the closet near the entrance and peered inside. She commented on the size of the living room, the view from the windows, the wasted space that seemed excessive for one person living alone. Every word sounded like concern. Every gesture looked like calculation. "This is beautiful, Dad," she said, but her eyes were counting square footage. Daniel lingered near the door, hands in his pockets, saying nothing. I remembered when he was a boy, how he used to run to me when I came home from work, how he would sit on my lap and ask me to explain how bridges stayed up. That boy was gone now, replaced by this silent stranger who couldn't even look his own father in the eye. "Margaret would have loved this place," Vanessa continued, pausing in front of the orchids. "Such a shame she never got to see it." I felt my jaw tighten. Margaret didn't just love this place. This place was her dream. The penthouse I bought 3 months after she died using the savings we'd built together over a lifetime, fulfilling the promise I made when she was too weak to leave her hospital bed. She had asked me to buy it anyway to live in it for both of us, and I had. Vanessa turned to face me, and for a moment her mask slipped just enough for me to see something hungry underneath. Then she smiled, warm and bright and completely false. "So, Dad," she said, tilting her head like a cat studying a bird, "which room will be ours?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a fire I hadn't seen coming. Which room will be ours? Not a request, not even a real question. It was a statement dressed in politeness, and we both knew it. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I walked to the window where Margaret used to stand with her morning coffee, where she would have stood if she had lived long enough to see this view. The city stretched out below, glass and steel, and thousands of lives moving through streets she would never walk again. I kept my back to Vanessa while I gathered my thoughts, while I reminded myself that anger was a luxury I couldn't afford. Not yet. Not until I understood exactly what I was dealing with. "Margaret dreamed of this view for 30 years, I said quietly. "Did you know that—" Vanessa made a sound that might have been interest or might have been impatience. I continued anyway. "When we were first married, we lived in a tiny apartment on the Lower East Side. 4th floor, no elevator, barely enough room to turn around. But there was a building across the street, one of those old pre-war towers with a penthouse at the top. Margaret used to look up at it every morning and tell me that someday we would live in a place like that. Somewhere with light. Somewhere with a view that made you feel like you were floating above the world." I turned to face them. Daniel had moved to the couch, sitting on the edge like he was ready to flee at any moment. Vanessa stood near the bookshelf, her arms crossed, her expression carefully neutral. "We never got that apartment," I continued. "Life happened, kids happened, Daniel happened. We bought a house in the suburbs because that's what you did back then. Margaret never complained. She said the dream could wait." I paused, feeling the old grief rise in my chest. "Then she got sick. Stage 4. The doctors gave her 6 months, and she lasted almost 8 because she was stubborn that way. During those last weeks when she could barely sit up in her hospital bed, she made me promise to buy the penthouse anyway. She said she wanted me to live in her dream even if she couldn't." The room was silent. Even Vanessa had stopped her restless movement, though I couldn't tell if she was moved or simply calculating her next approach. "I bought this place 3 months after she died," I said. "I promised her, and I kept my promise. That's what marriage means to me." Vanessa's expression shifted, something hard flickering behind her eyes. "That's a lovely story, Dad. Really. But let's be practical here." She gestured around the room with one manicured hand. "This is a lot of space for one person, a lot of empty rooms, a lot of memories that can't keep you company when you fall down in the middle of the night." Daniel flinched at that. I noticed, even if Vanessa didn't. "The dead don't need penthouses." She continued, her voice soft but her words sharp as glass. "The living do." I watched my son, waiting for him to say something, anything. Some defense of his mother's memory, some acknowledgement that this place meant more than square footage and real estate value. He stared at his hands and said nothing. My gaze drifted to the bookshelf behind Vanessa, to the photographs I had arranged there months ago. Margaret and me on our wedding day. Daniel as a baby, all chubby cheeks and toothless grin. Family vacations, holidays, ordinary moments that had become precious only in retrospect. And then I noticed one I had almost forgotten, tucked behind the others, half hidden in shadow. Margaret standing beside another woman. The resemblance was striking, almost unsettling. The same cheekbones, the same gentle eyes, the same way of tilting her head when she smiled. I had seen this photo before years ago, but Margaret had never explained it. She rarely talked about her family. There had been some kind of falling out. Something painful she didn't want to revisit. I had respected her privacy and never pushed. Now, looking at the photograph, I felt a strange pull, like a memory trying to surface through deep water. "Dad, are you listening?" Vanessa's voice snapped me back. She had moved closer, her perfume overwhelming in the small space between us. "I said you're too old to live alone in a place like this. What if something happens? What if you fall? What if you have a medical emergency and no one is here to help?" She reached out and touched my arm, her grip firm beneath the pretense of tenderness. "We're worried about you. Daniel and I have been talking, and we think it would be best for everyone if we moved in, just to keep an eye on things, just to make sure you're safe." There it was. The real agenda wrapped in concern like poison wrapped in sugar. I had seen this tactic before in business negotiations, in contract disputes, in all the ways people tried to take what wasn't theirs while pretending they were doing you a favor. Vanessa wasn't worried about my safety. She was worried about her access. I opened my mouth to respond, but she had already turned away, walking toward the mantel where Margaret's portrait hung. It was my favorite photograph of her taken on our 40th anniversary, her hair silver and her smile radiant. Vanessa studied it for a long moment, then reached out and traced her finger along the frame. "She's gone, Dad," she said softly, almost gently. "It's time to think about the living." She turned to look at me, and something in her expression made my blood run cold. "Starting with your granddaughter." Starting with your granddaughter. Those words stayed with me through 2 sleepless nights, turning over and over in my mind like a stone I couldn't stop touching. Olivia was 9 years old, bright and curious, and completely innocent of whatever game her mother was playing. The thought of Vanessa using her as leverage made something cold settle in my stomach. But I told myself to wait, to listen, to let them show me exactly what they wanted before I decided how to respond. They came back on Tuesday afternoon, this time with a folder. Vanessa spread the papers across my dining room table like a general laying out battle plans. Floor plans of the penthouse printed from some real estate website with rooms labeled in her neat handwriting. Master bedroom for Roland, guest suite for Daniel and Vanessa, the small study converted to Olivia's room. The second bathroom designated as shared family space. She had even noted where furniture would need to be rearranged, where her things would go, which closets she would need emptied. "We've thought this through very carefully," she said, tapping the papers with one polished nail. "This arrangement makes sense for everyone. You get family around to help with daily tasks. We get to spend more time with you. Olivia gets to know her grandfather. It's a win-win situation." I stared at the floor plans at my home, divided and labeled and assigned, without anyone asking my permission. The presumption of it took my breath away. She wasn't proposing anything. She was informing me of decisions already made. "Daniel," I said, turning to my son. He sat at the far end of the table looking everywhere except at me. "What do you think about this?" He shifted in his chair, glancing at Vanessa before answering. "I think it could work, Dad. And honestly, we could use the help right now. Things have been—" He trailed off, searching for words that wouldn't reveal too much. "Things have been what?" Another glance at Vanessa. Her expression had gone very still. "Tight," Daniel finally said. "Financially, I mean. We got behind on some credit cards. And the mortgage has been a struggle since I changed jobs. There was an investment opportunity last year that didn't pan out the way we expected." He tried to smile, but it came out crooked, almost pained. "Nothing we can't handle. Just a rough patch." I watched Vanessa watching him. Her eyes had narrowed just slightly, and I recognized the look. It was a warning, a silent command to stop talking before he said something she couldn't control. Daniel must have recognized it too, because he fell silent immediately, his shoulders drawing in like a child expecting to be scolded. "The point is," Vanessa said smoothly, stepping in to fill the gap, "we're family. Family helps each other. And you shouldn't have to worry about any of this, Dad. The finances, the logistics, the details. That's for us to handle." She smiled, warm and confident and utterly false. "I know how to take care of elderly family members. Trust me. I've done this before." The phrase landed strangely in the air between us. "I've done this before." She said it like a qualification, like a reference on a resume. But something about her tone, about the casual certainty in her voice, made the words feel heavier than she intended. "Done what before, exactly? Moved in with aging relatives, helped them with their finances, or something else entirely?" I filed the question away for later. Right now, I needed to buy time. "This is a lot to consider," I said carefully. "I appreciate you thinking of me, but I'm going to need a few days to process everything. This is my home. The decision about who lives here isn't something I can make in an afternoon." Vanessa's smile didn't waver, but something flickered behind her eyes. Annoyance, maybe. Or simply the recalculation of someone who had expected an easier victory. "Of course, Dad. Take all the time you need." She gathered the papers, sliding them back into the folder with practiced efficiency. We just want what's best for you, for the whole family. They left a few minutes later, Daniel mumbling a goodbye while Vanessa collected her purse and coat. I walked them to the door, playing the role of the grateful father, the confused old man who needed time to think. But as they stepped into the hallway, I heard Vanessa whisper something to Daniel. Her voice was low, meant only for him, but the acoustics of the corridor carried the words back to me with perfect clarity. He'll come around. They always do. They always do. Not he will, they, plural. How many other elderly family members had she handled? How many other confused old men had she guided toward decisions that served her interests? The question burned in my mind, demanding answers I didn't yet have. Vanessa turned back, one hand on the elevator button, her smile bright and harmless. Oh, and Dad, I almost forgot to mention. She paused, letting the moment stretch. Olivia already picked her room. She's been talking about living with Grandpa for weeks, drawing pictures of it, making plans. Her head tilted, her expression soft with manufactured warmth. You wouldn't want to disappoint her, would you? You wouldn't want to disappoint her, would you? The question echoed through the empty penthouse long after they had gone. I stood at the window watching the sun set over the city, watching the lights come on in 1,000 windows below, and I thought about my granddaughter, Olivia with her mother's dark hair and her father's gentle eyes. Olivia who still believed the world was a place where people said what they meant and meant what they said. She had no idea she was being used as a bargaining chip in a game she didn't know existed. 2 days passed. I slept poorly, ate less, and spent hours sitting in Margaret's chair trying to think my way through the maze Vanessa had constructed around me. Then on Thursday evening, my phone rang with a video call. Olivia's face filled the screen before I could prepare myself. Grandpa? Her voice was pure joy, uncomplicated and bright. Mommy said I could call you. She said you might have good news about the room. My heart contracted. She was so happy. So completely, innocently happy about something that had never been real, a promise made without my knowledge or consent. Hi, sweetheart. I managed, forcing warmth into my voice. It's so good to see you. I drew you a picture. She held up a crayon drawing the colors, bright and chaotic. See, that's the penthouse, and that's my room. I made the walls purple because purple is my favorite. Mommy said I could paint them if you say yes. She bounced in her seat, practically vibrating with excitement. Can I paint them, Grandpa? Can I? I looked at the drawing, at the crooked purple rectangle she had labeled Olivia's room in wobbly letters, and something inside me cracked. This wasn't fair. None of this was fair. She was 9 years old, and she had been told a story that might never come true, and when it didn't, she would blame me. Vanessa had made certain of that. We'll see, sweetheart, I said carefully. There's still a lot to figure out. But Mommy said it's almost decided. Olivia's face clouded with the first hint of doubt. She said you just need a little more time to get used to the idea. She said you're lonely and we're going to help you not be lonely anymore. Lonely. The word stung more than it should have. Was that how Vanessa had framed this to her daughter, poor lonely Grandpa, rattling around in his big empty penthouse desperate for company? The manipulation was so elegant it almost impressed me. Mommy teaches me about money all the time, Olivia continued, her mood brightening again as children's moods do. She says someday we'll have a big house just like yours, Grandpa. She says smart people know how to get nice things. I felt my smile freeze. Smart people know how to get nice things. It sounded like a lesson, something repeated and reinforced until it became truth. What else was Vanessa teaching her? That's nice, sweetheart, I said, keeping my voice neutral. And Mommy has a plan. Olivia's eyes went wide with the importance of sharing a secret. She calls it the family plan. She says, when we move in with you, everything is going to be better. She says, Olivia, honey, let me talk to Grandpa for a minute. Vanessa's voice came from somewhere off-screen, smooth and interrupting. A moment later, she appeared behind Olivia, her hands settling on the girl's shoulders, her smile perfectly calibrated. Sorry about that, Dad. You know how kids are. They hear bits and pieces and make up their own stories. She laughed lightly, but her eyes were watchful, assessing. Olivia, why don't you go finish your homework? I'll let you say goodbye in a minute. But I wasn't done telling Grandpa about homework first. The words were gentle, but the grip on Olivia's shoulders tightened just enough to communicate something the camera couldn't quite capture. Go on. Olivia's face fell, but she obeyed, disappearing from the frame with a mumbled, "Bye, Grandpa." I heard a door close somewhere in the background. Vanessa's smile widened once we were alone. She's so excited about this arrangement. I hope you're not thinking of disappointing her. Children remember these things, you know. They remember who kept their promises and who didn't. She ended the call before I could respond, her face vanishing from the screen, leaving me staring at my own reflection in the darkened glass. I sat motionless for a long time, the phone heavy in my hand. Mommy's plan, the family plan. Smart people know how to get nice things. The phrases circled in my mind like vultures waiting for something to die. I had dismissed them as childish repetition, the meaningless echoes of adult conversation filtered through a 9-year-old's understanding. But what if they weren't meaningless? What if Olivia had repeated exactly what she had been taught? My phone buzzed with a text message. I looked down, expecting another photo from Olivia, another piece of the pressure campaign Vanessa was constructing. Instead, I saw a name I hadn't expected: Samuel Briggs, my attorney. A man I trusted with my most important documents, a man who had helped Margaret and me plan our estate over 2 decades of careful, methodical work. The message was brief. "Roland, we need to talk. I found something concerning about your estate documents. Can you come to my office tomorrow? This shouldn't wait." I read the words 3 times, feeling the temperature in the room drop with each repetition. Something concerning. This shouldn't wait. Samuel was not a man given to alarm. In 30 years, I had never heard urgency in his voice or seen it in his correspondence. Whatever he had found, it was serious enough to break that pattern. I looked up from my phone to the photograph of Margaret on the mantel, her face frozen in that moment of 40th anniversary happiness. Then I looked at the spot where Vanessa had stood 2 days ago, tracing her finger along the frame, talking about the living and the dead. And for the first time, I saw her clearly. Not as a difficult daughter-in-law, not as a woman with boundary issues or an aggressive personality. I saw her as something far more dangerous, something that had been hiding in plain sight for years. A predator wearing a family mask patient and calculating, waiting for the right moment to strike. Samuel Briggs had been my attorney for 30 years. In all that time, I had never seen him look the way he looked when I walked into his office the next morning. His face was drawn, his usual calm replaced by something that resembled controlled alarm. He stood when I entered, shook my hand with both of his, and gestured toward the chair across from his desk without any of the small talk that usually preceded our meetings. "Thank you for coming so quickly," he said, settling back into his seat. "I wish this were a social visit." "Your message didn't sound like a social visit." He nodded, reaching for a manila folder on his desk. "It's not. Roland, I need to show you something, and I need you to stay calm when you see it. Can you do that for me?" The question itself was alarming. Samuel had guided me through contract disputes, property negotiations, and the most painful legal work of my life when Margaret was dying. He had never asked me to stay calm before showing me a document. Whatever was in that folder, it was bad. "Show me," I said. He opened the folder and slid a single sheet of paper across the desk. I recognized the format immediately. A durable power of attorney form, the kind that grants someone the legal authority to manage another person's finances and make decisions on their behalf. My name was printed at the top as the principal. Below it, in the space designated for the appointed agent, was Vanessa's name. "I don't understand," I said slowly. "I never signed this." "I know you didn't." Samuel pointed to the signature line at the bottom of the page. "Look closely at the signature. Tell me what you see." I leaned forward, studying the scrawl that was supposed to be my name. At first glance, it looked authentic. The loops, the slant, the way the letters connected. Someone had studied my handwriting carefully, but the more I looked, the more I noticed the small inconsistencies. The R was too rounded. The D leaned slightly in the wrong direction. The pressure of the pen varied in places where my hand would have been steady. "It's a forgery." I said the words, tasting like ash in my mouth. "A sophisticated one," Samuel agreed. "Good enough to fool a casual observer, maybe even a notary who wasn't paying close attention, but not good enough to fool someone who knows your signature as well as I do." He tapped another line on the document. "There's more. Look at the witness signature." I looked. The name written there made my stomach drop. Daniel Pierce. My son had witnessed this document. My son had watched someone forge my signature on a legal form that would have given his wife complete control over my life, and he had signed his name beside it. When was this filed? My voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. 3 months ago. It was submitted to the county clerk's office along with a stack of other routine paperwork. No one flagged it, no one questioned it. If I hadn't been doing a routine audit of your estate documents, I might never have found it. Samuel leaned back in his chair, his expression grim. Roland, do you understand what this means? If you had become incapacitated, or if someone had petitioned the court to declare you incompetent, Vanessa would have had full legal authority over your finances, your bank accounts, your investments, this penthouse, everything. The room seemed to tilt slightly. I gripped the arms of my chair, forcing myself to breathe. This wasn't opportunism, Samuel continued. This was premeditation. Someone planned this, carefully executed it methodically, and waited for the right moment to use it. If you hadn't invited me to review your documents last month, we might never have caught it. I thought about Vanessa's visit, her talk of moving in to take care of me, her suggestions that I was too old to live alone. I thought about the phrase she had used so casually. I know how to handle elderly family members. Trust me, I've done this before. Samuel, I said carefully, when Vanessa was at my penthouse, she said something strange. She said she had done this before, taken care of elderly family members. At the time, I thought she was just being arrogant, but now... Samuel's frown deepened. He pulled the document closer, studying the forged signature again with renewed intensity. This technique, he murmured almost to himself. The way the letters are constructed, the specific errors in the pressure patterns. I've seen something like this before. He looked up at me. There was a case from Ohio about 15 years ago. Elder financial exploitation. The perpetrator used almost identical methods to forge power of attorney documents. The case was settled out of court and the records were sealed, but I remember the details because it was such a textbook example of predatory behavior. He reached for his computer. Let me pull some records. If there's a connection, we need to know about it. I sat in silence while he typed, my mind racing through implications I wasn't ready to face. Vanessa had been part of my family for 12 years. She had been at holiday dinners, birthday parties, Margaret's funeral. She had held my hand and told me she was sorry for my loss. And all that time she had been waiting, planning, preparing to take everything I had. There's one more thing, Samuel said, looking up from his screen. Something I should have told you sooner, but the timing never seemed right. He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. Before Margaret passed, she came to see me alone. She was already very sick, but she was lucid, determined. She asked me to do something for her after she was gone. What did she ask? She asked me to contact someone for you when the time was right, her sister, a woman named Grace Walker. Samuel watched my face as he spoke, gauging my reaction. Margaret said Grace would know what to do if Vanessa ever showed her true colors. Those were her exact words. If Vanessa ever showed her true colors. The room went very quiet. I could hear my own heartbeat, steady but too fast, pumping blood through a body that suddenly felt unfamiliar. Margaret had a sister, I whispered. She never told me. In 43 years of marriage, she never once mentioned a sister. Samuel nodded gravely. She had her reasons. Reasons she shared with me in confidence, reasons I'm not at liberty to discuss. But Grace is real, Roland. She's been waiting for this call for 2 years. He closed the folder and met my eyes. Give me a few days to arrange a meeting. What Grace knows about Vanessa, about Margaret's fears, about everything that's been hidden from you, you need to hear it yourself. The week that followed was the longest of my life. I moved through the days like a man walking underwater, every motion slow and heavy, every thought circling back to the same impossible questions. Margaret had a sister. Margaret had kept secrets. Margaret had seen something in Vanessa that I had missed for 12 years, and she had made plans I knew nothing about. The woman I thought I knew completely, the woman I had loved for 43 years, had hidden an entire person from me. I didn't know whether to feel betrayed or protected. Samuel called on the 7th day. She's ready to meet you, he said. Tomorrow afternoon, there's a cafe on Madison Quiet Place, back corner booth. She'll be waiting at 2 o'clock. I arrived 15 minutes early. The cafe was small and dimly lit, the kind of place where people came to have conversations they didn't want overheard. I chose the booth Samuel had described, ordered coffee I didn't intend to drink, and waited. The door opened at exactly 2 o'clock, and a woman walked in who made my heart stop. She had Margaret's eyes. Not similar eyes. Not eyes that reminded me of my wife. The exact same eyes, the same shape and color and depth, looking out from a face that was familiar and foreign all at once. She was younger than Margaret would have been, maybe 65, with silver hair pulled back in a simple knot and the kind of posture that spoke of quiet strength. She scanned the room, found me, and walked over with a calm that seemed practiced, like someone who had prepared for this moment many times in her mind. "Roland," she said. It wasn't a question. "I'm Grace." She slid into the booth across from me, and for a long moment neither of us spoke. I studied her face, searching for my wife in the curve of her cheekbones, the set of her jaw, the way she folded her hands on the table. The resemblance was painful, beautiful, and painful. "You look like her," I finally said. "We were sisters." Grace's voice was steady, but I caught the slight tremor beneath. 3 years apart. People used to think we were twins when we were young. She paused, letting the silence stretch. "I know you have questions. I'll answer everything I can. Why didn't she tell me about you?" Grace sighed, something old and heavy passing across her face. "Because we weren't speaking. Hadn't been for 20 years. Our parents died within a year of each other, and there was a dispute about the estate, money, property, the usual poison that tears families apart." She shook her head slowly. "We said things we couldn't take back, made accusations we couldn't forgive. By the time we realized how stupid it all was, too much time had passed. Pride is a terrible thing, Roland. It makes cowards of us all." I thought about the photograph I had found on my bookshelf, Margaret standing beside a woman who looked just like her. A photograph she had kept but never explained, a silence she had maintained for our entire marriage. "But she reached out to you," I said, "before she died. 6 months before the end." Grace's eyes grew distant, remembering. "She called me out of nowhere. I almost didn't answer. I saw her name on the screen, and my first instinct was to let it go to voicemail to protect myself from whatever old wound she wanted to reopen." She smiled, sad and small. "Thank God I didn't. She told me she was dying. She apologized for everything, for the silence, for the wasted years, and then she asked me for something I couldn't refuse." "What did she ask?" Grace met my eyes directly. "She asked me to watch over you after she was gone, especially to watch Vanessa. She said she didn't trust her, that something about her had always felt wrong, but she couldn't prove anything. She was too sick to investigate herself, too tired to fight, so she asked me to be her eyes when she couldn't see anymore." The words settled over me like a weight. Margaret had known. Even dying, even fading, she had seen what I had been blind to for years. "I've been watching ever since," Grace continued, quietly, from a distance. "I started going to the same church as Vanessa, shopping at the same grocery stores, learning her patterns, her habits, the way she talked to people when she thought no one important was listening." She paused. "I know that sounds strange, maybe even obsessive, but Margaret asked me to wait until you needed help, and I didn't want to interfere before then. You had your grief, you had your own process. I didn't think it was my place to insert myself into your life until the moment was right. And now Samuel tells me there's a forged power of attorney with your name on it. Now Vanessa is pushing to move into your home. Now the moment is right." Grace leaned forward, her expression sharpening. "Roland, Margaret always told me the Penthouse was just the tip of the iceberg. She planned for everything. She set up protections you don't even know about yet. She just didn't live long enough to tell you herself." I felt something shift in my chest, a strange mixture of grief and gratitude. Even from beyond the grave, Margaret was still trying to protect me, still fighting battles I couldn't see. "There's something else," Grace said, her voice dropping lower. "Something I've been waiting 2 years to tell you." She reached into her purse and pulled out her phone, setting it on the table between us. "At Margaret's funeral, while you were receiving condolences near the casket, a woman approached me. She didn't know who I was. She thought I was just another mourner, a stranger she could talk to without consequence." My throat tightened. "Vanessa?" Grace nodded. "She started a conversation. asked me questions about the family, about Margaret's finances, about what she might have left behind. She was fishing for information, testing how much an outsider might know. Grace's jaw hardened. But I wasn't a stranger, and I wasn't unprepared. I had my phone recording in my pocket the entire time. She tapped the screen, and I saw a file saved with a date from 2 years ago, the date of Margaret's funeral. What she said to me that day, Grace continued, her eyes locked on mine, will change everything you think you know about her. Are you ready to hear it? Are you ready to hear it? The question hung between us, heavy with the weight of everything that was about to change. I looked at the phone on the table at the file dated the day we buried my wife, and I realized that ready was beside the point. Some truths don't wait for readiness. They simply arrive, and you either face them or you don't. Play it, I said. Grace tapped the screen. For a moment there was only ambient noise, the muffled sounds of a gathering voices overlapping in the distance, the kind of background hum that accompanies any funeral reception. Then Vanessa's voice emerged clear and unmistakable, and the cafe around me seemed to fade away. Such a beautiful service, Vanessa was saying, her tone warm and sympathetic. Were you close to Margaret? Grace's voice responded carefully neutral. We knew each other years ago, lost touch. I just wanted to pay my respects. That's so kind. Family means everything at times like this. A pause, then Vanessa's voice dropped slightly, becoming more confidential. I'm her daughter-in-law, married to her son Daniel. We've been trying to support Roland through all this, but honestly, it's been difficult. The man is so stubborn. Margaret left him everything you know. The savings, the investments, and now this penthouse he bought after she died. A fortune, really. And he just sits on it. I felt my hands begin to tremble. The coffee cup in front of me rattled slightly against the saucer. That old man is sitting on a fortune he doesn't deserve. Vanessa continued, her voice hardening with something that sounded almost like contempt. Margaret was always soft on him. Let him make all the decisions, control all the money. She should have planned better. Someone who actually knows how to use money should have it. People like him just waste it until they die. The words hit me like physical blows. That old man doesn't deserve, waste it until they die. She was talking about me as though I were already gone, as though my life was merely an inconvenient delay in her plans. The casual cruelty of it was worse than any direct insult could have been. This wasn't anger or frustration. This was calculation. This was someone who had already written me off as an obstacle to be removed. The whole situation is just so unfair. Vanessa's recorded voice went on. Daniel and I work so hard and we're barely getting by. Meanwhile, Roland has more money than he could spend in 3 lifetimes, and he won't share a penny of it. He talks about honoring Margaret's memory, but what about honoring her family? What about taking care of the people who are still alive? Grace tapped the screen again, and the recording stopped. The cafe sounds rushed back in the clink of cups, the murmur of other conversations, the ordinary noises of a world that had no idea what I was going through. I'm sorry, Grace said quietly. I know that was hard to hear. I couldn't speak. My throat had closed around something sharp and bitter, a feeling I couldn't name. Betrayal, yes. Anger, certainly. But underneath it all was something worse, a sick realization that I had welcomed this woman into my home, into my family for 12 years. I had trusted her with my son, with my granddaughter, with the memory of my wife, and she had been waiting the whole time, watching me like a vulture watches a wounded animal, patient and hungry. The way she talked, Grace continued, her voice steady but her eyes watchful on my face. The calculated questions she asked about assets and inheritance, it didn't sound like someone venting frustration. It sounded rehearsed, practiced, like she had done this exact routine before with other people at other funerals. She paused, letting the implication settle. That's when I knew I needed to dig deeper. Margaret asked me to watch Vanessa, but watching wasn't going to be enough, so I hired a private investigator. I looked up. You what? I hired someone to look into her background, her history before she married Daniel, where she came from, who she was, whether there were any patterns. Grace reached into her purse and withdrew a manila folder thick with documents. She set it on the table between us, her hand resting on the cover as though she were reluctant to let go. It took months. Vanessa has been very careful about covering her tracks. She changed her name when she got married, moved states, built a completely new identity. But my investigator is thorough. He found things she thought were buried forever. The folder sat there like a bomb waiting to detonate. I stared at it, knowing that whatever was inside would change everything, that there would be no going back once I opened it. What did he find? Grace slid the folder toward me, her expression grave. Court records from Ohio, 15 years ago. A civil case that was settled out of court and sealed, but the original filings are still accessible if you know where to look. She met my eyes, and I saw something in her gaze that might have been pity or might have been warning. Roland Vanessa has done this before. The same pattern, the same techniques. An elderly man with money, a forged power of attorney, a family torn apart by manipulation. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. And last time someone died. Last time someone died. Grace's words followed me home like a shadow I couldn't outrun. I sat in my car outside the Penthouse for nearly an hour, the manila folder unopened on the passenger seat, unable to make myself go inside. The building that had once represented Margaret's dream now felt like a fortress under siege, its walls holding secrets I was only beginning to understand. When I finally climbed out and took the elevator up, the silence of the apartment pressed against me like a physical weight. I didn't open the folder that night. I wasn't ready. Instead, I went to the small desk in the corner of the bedroom where I kept important papers, the place where Samuel had stored the documents Margaret left behind. Among them was an envelope I had never opened, cream-colored and sealed with her careful hand, my name written across the front, in the handwriting I knew better than my own. She had given it to Samuel 3 weeks before she died, with instructions that I should read it when the time was right. For 2 years I had told myself the time wasn't right, that I wasn't ready, that the grief was still too fresh. Now I understood that I had been waiting for this moment without knowing it. I carried the envelope to Margaret's chair by the window, the place where she used to sit in the evenings, watching the city lights come on one by one. I turned on the small lamp beside it, settled into the cushion that still held the faint shape of her body, and broke the seal. Her handwriting filled the page, familiar and intimate, the same script that had written me love notes and grocery lists and birthday cards for 4 decades. But there was something different about these words. They were written by a woman who knew she was dying, who was trying to reach across the boundary of death to protect someone she would soon leave behind. My dearest Roland, the letter began, and I had to stop already, my throat tightening around the sound of her voice in my head. If you're reading this, something has happened with Vanessa. I don't know what form it will take, but I know it will come. I've watched her for years, Roland. The way she looks at our home, our savings, our life together. It's not love. It's not even greed exactly. It's calculation, cold and patient and utterly without conscience. I couldn't prove it. I had no evidence, nothing I could point to and say, look, here is the danger. But I felt it in my bones, the way you feel a storm coming before the clouds appear. She is waiting for something, and whatever it is, it will not be good for you. I read the words twice, 3 times, feeling the truth of them settle into my chest. Margaret had seen. Even through the fog of illness, even while her body was failing her, she had seen what I had been blind to for over a decade. I've tried to prepare, the letter continued. I've asked Grace to watch over you after I'm gone. I know you'll be surprised to learn about her. I'm sorry I kept her from you. Our estrangement was my shame, and I didn't want it to become yours. But she is good, Roland. She is loyal, and she will help you when the time comes. I've also asked Samuel to protect the assets, to make sure the legal safeguards are in place. He knows what to do. The next paragraph made my breath catch. But most importantly, my love, protect Olivia. That child has your kindness in her. I see it every time she laughs, every time she asks questions about the world, every time she looks at you with those trusting eyes. Don't let Vanessa poison it. Don't let her turn that little girl into what she is. Whatever else happens, whatever Vanessa takes or tries to take, save Olivia. She deserves better than the future her mother is planning for her. Tears were falling now, sliding down my cheeks and dropping onto the paper. I didn't wipe them away. They felt like the only honest thing I had left. Everything you need is in my room at the Penthouse, the letter concluded. I've prepared more than you know. Grace will help you understand when the time comes. Trust her, trust Samuel, and trust yourself, Roland. You are stronger than you think. You have always been stronger than you think. The last line was written slightly apart from the rest, as though she had added it later, perhaps in a different moment of clarity. I love you. I have always loved you, and I will be watching over you even when you can't see me. I pressed the letter to my chest and sat in her chair until the sky outside turned from black to gray. At some point I must have slept, because I woke to morning light and the stiffness of a body that had been still too long. The letter was still in my hands. Margaret's words still echoing in my mind. I looked up at her photograph on the mantel, at the face I had loved for more than half my life, and I spoke to her the way I had every morning since she died. I'll honor your wishes, my love, every single one. But this time the words were not just ritual. They were promise. They were oath. They were the foundation of everything I was about to do. I picked up my phone and called Grace. She answered on the second ring as though she had been waiting. Tell me everything about Ohio, I said. I need to know exactly who I'm dealing with. Grace came to the Penthouse the next morning. She carried a briefcase I hadn't seen before. Leather and worn at the corners, the kind that held documents meant to be kept rather than discarded. We sat at my dining room table, the same table where Vanessa had spread her floor plans just days ago, and Grace opened the briefcase with the careful precision of someone about to perform surgery. My investigator spent 4 months on this, she said, laying out papers in neat rows. Vanessa has been very thorough about erasing her past, but no one erases everything. There are always traces if you know where to look. The first document was a marriage certificate from Ohio dated 2007. The bride's name was listed as Vanessa Hartwell. The groom was Charles Hartwell, age 68. I did the math quickly. Vanessa would have been 23 at the time, 35 years younger than her husband. Charles Hartwell was a retired manufacturing executive, Grace explained. Widowed, no children, worth approximately $4 million. He met Vanessa at a community event for seniors. She was volunteering, if you can believe it, helping with meals, organizing activities. Everyone thought she was so caring, so devoted to the elderly. I looked at the photograph clipped to the marriage certificate. Vanessa's face was younger, but unmistakable. The same sharp features, the same calculated smile. Charles Hartwell stood beside her, a frail-looking man with kind eyes and the slightly bewildered expression of someone who couldn't believe his luck. Within 18 months of the marriage, Vanessa had complete control of his finances, Grace continued. Power of attorney, joint accounts, her name added to all his properties. Charles's neighbors said he seemed confused in those final months, forgetful, not quite himself. Some of them suspected she was giving him something, but no one could prove it. My stomach turned. What happened to him? Grace's expression darkened. He died in his sleep, 3 years after the wedding. The death certificate said heart failure, which is convenient because it's almost impossible to dispute. But his family didn't believe it. His sister and his nephew filed a civil lawsuit against Vanessa within weeks of the funeral. She slid another document toward me, a legal filing thick with accusations. Elder financial exploitation, undue influence, fraud, forgery. The language was dense and technical, but the meaning was clear. Charles Hartwell's family believed Vanessa had systematically stolen his fortune and possibly hastened his death. The evidence was substantial, Grace said. Forged signatures on financial documents just like the one Samuel found with your name on them. Bank accounts drained in the months before his death. A new will that left everything to Vanessa written when Charles was already showing signs of cognitive decline. His family's lawyers were confident they would win. But they didn't win. They never got the chance. Vanessa settled out of court 6 months into the litigation. She paid Charles's family approximately $200,000, a fraction of what she had taken. In exchange, the case was sealed and everyone signed non-disclosure agreements. Grace's voice was flat factual, but I could hear the anger underneath. She walked away with most of his money and a clean record. No criminal charges, no public accountability, just a sealed file that was supposed to stay buried forever. I stared at the documents spread across my table, the paper trail of a life I had never known existed. The woman who had sat in my home, who had kissed my cheek and called me dad, who had given birth to my granddaughter, was not who she claimed to be. She was something else entirely, something that hunted. After the settlement, she disappeared, Grace continued. Changed her name back to her mother's maiden name, moved to New York. Built a completely new identity with no connection to Ohio or Charles Hartwell. She paused, pulling out one final document. 18 months later, she showed up at a charity gala in Manhattan, one of those events designed to connect young professionals with established families. Networking opportunities, they called it. A chance to meet people with resources and influence. I knew what was coming before she said it. That's where she met Daniel. Your son attended that gala representing your engineering firm. He was young, successful, from a family with money. Exactly her type. Grace met my eyes. She wasn't looking for love, Roland. She was looking for her next target. The room seemed to contract around me. I thought about Daniel at 28, earnest and trusting, proud of the family business, and eager to make connections. I thought about Vanessa approaching him at that gala, charming and beautiful and so very interested in his life, his family, his future. He never stood a chance. None of us did. Margaret found out somehow, I said slowly, the pieces finally falling into place. That's why she reached out to you. That's why she made all those preparations. She knew. Grace nodded. She never told me exactly how she discovered it. Maybe she hired her own investigator, maybe she stumbled onto something by accident. But yes, she knew, and she spent her final months trying to protect you from something she couldn't stop directly. I sat in silence, letting the truth wash over me. My wife had died carrying this burden, knowing that a predator lived inside our family, unable to expose her without tearing apart our son's life. She had done what she could, put safeguards in place, reached out to a sister she hadn't spoken to in 20 years. All of it from a hospital bed while cancer consumed her body. When I finally spoke, my voice was steady but cold, colder than I had ever heard it. She's not just greedy. She's a professional. And my son married her without knowing any of this. The days that followed were filled with planning. Grace and I met twice more, going over the documents, discussing strategy, preparing for what would come next. Samuel joined us for the second meeting, his legal mind turning the evidence into a framework we could use. But through all of it, one thought kept circling in my mind like a vulture that wouldn't land. Olivia. Whatever we did to Vanessa, whatever justice we pursued, my granddaughter would be caught in the middle. She was 9 years old, and her world was about to collapse. My phone rang on the fourth evening, and Olivia's face appeared on the screen before I could prepare myself. She was bouncing with excitement, her dark hair flying around her face, words tumbling out faster than I could follow. Grandpa? Grandpa, guess what Mommy says? We might move really soon. She says the penthouse is almost ready for us. I forced a smile, my chest tightening. Is that so, sweetheart? Yes, and Mommy says when you go to heaven we'll live there forever and ever. She said it so brightly, so innocently, like she was describing a vacation rather than my death. She says we'll sell your other houses too, the cabin and the one near the beach. Mommy says it's our turn to be rich. The words hit me like a fist to the stomach. Our turn to be rich, as if my life was simply a waiting period, an inconvenience standing between Vanessa and the fortune she believed she deserved. But worse than the betrayal was the realization of what Vanessa was doing to my granddaughter. She was teaching Olivia to see my death as a financial opportunity. She was grooming her own daughter to think of loss as profit, of family as currency. By the time I was gone, Olivia would have been shaped into something unrecognizable, the kindness I saw in her twisted into the same cold calculation that lived behind her mother's eyes. That sounds like a big plan, I managed to say, keeping my voice steady. Does Mommy talk about this a lot? All the time. She has a special notebook where she writes everything down. She calls it the family plan. Olivia leaned closer to the screen, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. I'm not supposed to tell anyone, but you're my grandpa, so it's okay, right? Right, sweetheart? You can always tell me anything. Vanessa's voice cut in from somewhere off screen. Olivia, who are you talking to? The call ended abruptly, the screen going dark, leaving me staring at my own reflection. I sat motionless for a long time, the phone heavy in my hand. The family plan, a special notebook. Vanessa had been preparing for this moment for years, and she had been foolish enough to document it, or arrogant enough to believe no one would ever find out. The call from Daniel came hours later, well past midnight. I was still awake, sitting in Margaret's chair, unable to sleep. His voice was thick and slurred when I answered, the unmistakable fog of too much whiskey clouding his words. Dad, are you there? I'm here, Daniel. I need to talk to you. I need to tell you something. There was a long pause, filled with the sound of his ragged breathing. I'm scared, Dad. I'm so scared. I sat forward, suddenly alert. Scared of what? Of her. The word came out in a whisper, as if even saying it aloud was dangerous. She's been pressuring me for months. About the money, about the penthouse, about you. She won't stop. And the debt, Dad. It's worse than I told you. Much worse. She took out loans in my name. Credit cards I didn't know about. We owe more than I can ever pay back. My heart ached for him, this man who had once been my little boy, now trapped in a cage of his own making. Daniel, listen to me. That's not all. His voice dropped even lower, barely audible through the phone. The papers she made me sign. The power of attorney, the other documents. I knew something was wrong, Dad. I knew it wasn't right. So I kept copies. Everything she made me sign, I made copies and hid them. I didn't know what else to do. I didn't know how to stop her. The confession hung between us, fragile and unexpected. Daniel had known. Somewhere inside my weak, compliant son, a conscience had survived. He had seen the wrongness of what his wife was doing, and he had preserved evidence, even if he lacked the courage to act on it. Where are the copies now? I asked carefully. Safe, hidden where she can't find them. I was waiting, Dad, waiting for the right moment, but I don't know if there is a right moment anymore. I don't know if I can get out of this. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of everything I had learned pressing down on me. Vanessa was a predator, a professional who had done this before. But Daniel was not beyond saving. Neither was Olivia. If I played this carefully, if I moved at exactly the right moment, I might be able to rescue them both. Daniel, listen to me carefully. My voice was quiet but firm, steady with a certainty I hadn't felt in weeks. Your wife isn't who you think she is. I have proof, evidence of things she did before she ever met you, and now you have a choice to make. I paused, letting the words sink in. Her or your family. There is no middle ground anymore. Her or your family. I had given Daniel 48 hours to make his choice. 2 days to decide whether he would stand with the woman who had been manipulating him for 12 years, or with the father and daughter who still believed in redemption. I didn't know which way he would fall. Part of me feared I had pushed too hard, that Vanessa would sense the shift in the wind and accelerate whatever plan she had been nursing. As it turned out, I didn't have to wait long to find out. She came to the penthouse the following afternoon, unannounced and uninvited. I heard the elevator doors open, heard her heels clicking across the marble floor of the hallway, and then my doorbell was ringing with the kind of aggressive insistence that demanded immediate response. When I opened the door, her face was a mask of controlled fury. "We need to talk," she said, pushing past me before I could respond. She moved into the living room like she owned it, her eyes scanning the space as though cataloging everything for future reference. Then she turned to face me, her arms crossed, her posture radiating a threat she didn't bother to disguise. "I want the spare keys," she said, "all of them, to the penthouse, to your car, to the storage unit, everything." I closed the door slowly, buying myself a moment to settle into the calm I would need. "Why would you need my keys, Vanessa?" "Because we're family and family shares." Her voice was clipped, impatient. "Because you're 70 years old and living alone and someone needs to have access in case of emergency. Because I'm tired of asking nicely. And if I say no," her expression hardened, "then maybe I need to reconsider how much time Olivia spends with you. A man your age alone in this big apartment showing signs of confusion. It wouldn't be responsible of me to let my daughter visit unsupervised." The threat landed exactly where she intended it. She was using Olivia again, the same weapon she had deployed from the beginning. But this time, I was ready. "I'm not confused, Vanessa. In fact, I've never seen things more clearly." I walked to the desk by the window where I had placed the forged power of attorney document Samuel had discovered. I picked it up and turned back to face her, holding the paper where she could see it. "Can you explain this signature? Because it's not mine." The change in her face was subtle but unmistakable. A flicker of surprise, quickly suppressed. A brief tightening around the eyes. Then the mask slammed back into place and she tilted her head as though examining something mildly curious. "I don't know what that is," she said smoothly. "It's a durable power of attorney giving you complete control over my finances, filed 3 months ago with my signature forged at the bottom." I kept my voice level, conversational. "Daniel witnessed it, but I never signed it. Daniel handled all of that paperwork." She waved a dismissive hand. "He must have made a mistake. You know how careless he can be." A mistake that just happens to give you access to my bank accounts, my investments, this penthouse. That's quite a convenient mistake. Her composure cracked slightly. You're confused, Dad. This is exactly what I was worried about. Memory issues, paranoia, seeing conspiracies where there aren't any. She softened her voice, attempting concern. Maybe we need to have you evaluated. Talk to a doctor about what's happening with your cognitive function. I almost admired the pivot. Caught with evidence of fraud, she had shifted seamlessly to questioning my sanity. It was the same playbook she had used with Charles Hartwell, the same gradual undermining of an elderly man's credibility until no one would believe anything he said. But I had read the case files. I knew how this game was played. My memory is fine, I said quietly, and I have witnesses who will testify to that. Something changed in her eyes then. The pretense of concern evaporated, replaced by something cold and calculating and far more honest than anything I had seen from her before. She straightened her mask, falling away completely, and when she spoke again, her voice was different, harder, more real. You think you can win this? She took a step toward me, her chin raised in defiance. You think you're the first stubborn old man who thought he could outsmart me? They all think they're clever, Roland. They all think they see through me, and they all end up the same way. The admission hung in the air between us, naked and undeniable. She wasn't even pretending anymore. She was showing me exactly who she was confident that I was too old, too isolated, too weak to do anything about it. She was wrong. I know about Ohio, Vanessa. My voice was steady, calm, utterly controlled. I know about Charles Hartwell. I know what you did to him, how you took his money, how he died 3 years after you married him. I know about the lawsuit his family filed and the settlement you paid to make it go away. I held her gaze without flinching. And I know exactly what you are. The color drained from Vanessa's face. For one satisfying moment, I watched the careful architecture of her confidence collapse, replaced by something raw and exposed. She opened her mouth to speak, closed it again, her mind visibly racing through options and finding none that could undo what I had just said. Charles Hartwell, Ohio. The words hung between us like a verdict already delivered. You don't know what you're talking about. She finally managed, but her voice had lost its edge. That was a misunderstanding, a family dispute that got out of hand. I was cleared of everything. You settled out of court and paid $200,000 to make it disappear. That's not being cleared. That's buying silence. Before she could respond, the sound of the front door opening cut through the tension. We both turned as Daniel stepped into the penthouse, but something about him was different. He stood straighter than I had seen him stand in years. His eyes were clear-focused, and in his hands he carried a folder that made Vanessa's expression shift from surprise to alarm. Daniel. Her voice snapped to command mode. What are you doing here? We talked about this. Let me handle your father. No. The word was quiet but firm. I'm done letting you handle things. He walked past her without a glance, coming to stand beside me. When he opened the folder, I saw what he had brought. Original documents, the ones he had secretly copied and preserved, bearing his genuine signature in places where the filed versions showed alterations. Side by side, the forgery was obvious. The handwriting didn't match. The dates had been changed. The evidence of tampering was undeniable. I signed papers. Daniel said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. She told me they were routine. Financial planning, she called it. Protection for the family. But when I looked at them more closely, I realized what they actually said, what they would do. He turned to face me, and I saw tears forming in his eyes. I was too scared to confront her dad, too deep in debt, too dependent on her approval. But I wasn't stupid enough to destroy the evidence. I kept the originals. I hid them where she couldn't find them. Vanessa's composure shattered completely. You pathetic, spineless traitor. Her voice rose to a shriek, all pretense of civility abandoned. After everything I've done for you, I made you Daniel. I took a weak, directionless boy and turned him into someone who mattered. Everything you have is because of me. Your career, your connections, your daughter, all of it. Daniel didn't argue. He didn't defend himself or make excuses. He simply looked at her with something that might have been pity, or might have been the exhaustion of someone finally setting down a burden they had carried too long. No, he said quietly. Everything I have I got by betraying my father, by standing silent while you manipulated him, by letting you use Olivia as a weapon. He shook his head slowly. I'm done, Vanessa. I'm I'm done being afraid of you." Something broke in her then. The calculated predator I had glimpsed moments ago gave way to something more primal, more desperate. She lunged toward Daniel, reaching for the folder, her fingers clawing at the documents that represented her undoing. "Give me those. You have no idea what you're doing. You'll ruin everything." I stepped between them, catching her wrist before she could grab the papers. Her strength surprised me, fueled by panic and rage, but I held firm. Up close, I could see the wildness in her eyes, the absolute terror of someone watching their carefully constructed world collapse. "Let go of me." She twisted against my grip, her voice rising to a scream. "You can't do this. I'll destroy both of you. I'll take Olivia and you'll never see her again. I'll tell everyone you're senile, that Daniel is mentally unstable, that you've both been conspiring against me." "You can try," I said calmly, "but I don't think anyone will believe you." I released her wrist and she stumbled backward, nearly falling, catching herself against the edge of the sofa. Her hair had come loose from its careful arrangement. Her makeup was smeared where tears of fury had begun to fall. She looked nothing like the polished woman who had walked into my penthouse demanding keys. She looked exactly like what she was, a cornered animal, dangerous but trapped. Daniel handed me the folder and I held it carefully, feeling the weight of evidence that would change everything. But this wasn't the end. There was one more piece of the puzzle, one more revelation that would seal Vanessa's fate completely. "This is forgery," I said, my voice measured and clear. "Fraud, attempted elder financial exploitation, crimes that carry serious penalties, especially given your history in Ohio." I watched her face as each word landed. "But there's one more thing you haven't seen. Something Margaret left behind." Vanessa's eyes widened. For the first time, I saw genuine fear there, the fear of someone who realizes they have underestimated their opponent completely. "Follow me," I said, and turned toward Margaret's room. We never made it to Margaret's room on our own. Before I had taken 3 steps, a small voice cut through the tension like a beam of light breaking through storm clouds. "Grandpa, Grandpa!" Olivia came running down the hallway, her eyes wide with excitement, her dark hair bouncing against her shoulders. I hadn't even known she was in the penthouse. Vanessa must have brought her along, perhaps planning to use her as leverage once again. But something had happened while the adults were consumed with their confrontation. Something that changed everything. "Grandpa, I found Grandma's secret." She grabbed my hand, tugging with the insistent strength of a child who has discovered something wonderful. "She left us a treasure. Come see, come see." Vanessa's face went pale. "Olivia, what are you talking about? What did you find?" But Olivia ignored her mother completely, pulling me toward the room at the end of the hall. Margaret's room. The one space in the penthouse that I had kept exactly as she would have wanted it, the one room Vanessa had never been allowed to enter. I had made that boundary clear from the day I moved in, and for once Vanessa had respected it. Perhaps she sensed that pushing too hard on that particular door would have revealed too much too soon. Olivia led me inside, and I saw immediately what had happened. A painting on the far wall, one of Margaret's favorites, hung crooked on its hook. Behind it, a section of the wall had swung open on hidden hinges, revealing a small safe built into the structure itself. I had lived in this penthouse for 2 years without knowing it existed. Margaret had kept her secrets well. "I was talking to Grandma," Olivia explained, pointing to the photograph of Margaret on the dresser. "I told her about the fighting. I asked her to help make everyone stop being angry." She looked up at me with those trusting eyes. "And then I bumped the picture on the wall by accident and it moved and I found the treasure." "Do you think Grandma heard me, Grandpa? Do you think she showed me where to look?" My throat tightened. "I think she did, sweetheart. I think she's been watching over us the whole time." Vanessa pushed into the room behind us, Daniel following close, her eyes fixed on the open safe with an expression of dawning horror. "What is that? What's in there?" I approached the safe slowly, my heart pounding. Inside, arranged with Margaret's characteristic precision, were several items: a USB drive in a small plastic case, a thick envelope marked with legal stamps that I recognized as official trust documents, a smaller envelope addressed to Olivia in Margaret's handwriting with instructions written below, "To be opened on your 18th birthday, not before." And finally, a manila folder with a label that made my breath catch: Phase 2, for Grace's eyes only. I took out the USB drive first, turning it over in my hands. Margaret had prepared this. She had known this moment would come, had anticipated it with the same careful planning she brought to everything she did. Even dying, even fading, she had been building a fortress to protect the people she loved. "There's a laptop in the study," Daniel said quietly. "We can play whatever's on that drive." We gathered in the study, all of us, even Vanessa, who seemed unable to tear herself away from the unfolding disaster. I inserted the USB drive and clicked on the single video file it contained. Margaret's face filled the screen, thin and pale, clearly filmed during her final weeks, but her eyes were sharp, determined, very much alive. "Roland," she began, and the sound of her voice, after 2 years of silence, hit me like a physical blow. "If you're watching this, Vanessa has finally shown who she really is. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you sooner. I'm sorry I had to keep so many secrets, but I needed to be certain, and I ran out of time." I heard Vanessa inhale sharply behind me. On the screen, Margaret continued. "I discovered the truth about her past 18 months before I died. A private investigator hired on a hunch found records from Ohio that told me everything I needed to know. I wanted to tell you immediately, but I knew what it would do to Daniel, to Olivia, to our family. So I made a different choice. I prepared." Margaret's image leaned closer to the camera, her voice strengthening despite her obvious frailty. "Everything you need to protect yourself and Olivia is in that safe. The original will and trust documents drafted by Samuel under my direction. A letter for Olivia explaining everything when she's old enough to understand. And information for Grace, my sister, who I've asked to help you when this moment came." She paused, and something like a smile crossed her face. "Grace will explain the rest. She knows things even I chose not to write down." The video continued for several more minutes, Margaret explaining legal provisions, offering advice, telling me she loved me. But I was already reaching for the trust documents, already scanning the pages with growing amazement. The penthouse was not mine to give away. It never had been. Margaret had placed it in an irrevocable trust the month before she died, with Olivia named as the sole beneficiary upon reaching age 18. Until then, Roland Pierce and Grace Walker would serve as co-trustees with full authority to manage the property and absolute power to determine who could and could not reside there. Vanessa had no claim. Daniel had no claim. Every scheme, every forged document, every manipulation had been aimed at an asset that was already beyond their reach. I looked up from the documents, finding Vanessa's face across the room. She had gone completely white, her hands trembling at her sides, the full scope of her failure finally becoming clear. "The penthouse belongs to Olivia," I said quietly. "It's been in trust since before Margaret died. You never had a chance, Vanessa. She outsmarted you from beyond the grave." The days that followed moved with a strange dreamlike quality. Vanessa left the penthouse that night without another word, her face frozen in an expression I had never seen before. Something between shock and the dawning recognition of total defeat. Daniel stayed behind, sitting in my living room until well past midnight, sometimes talking, sometimes just staring at his hands. We didn't solve anything that night. Some wounds are too deep to heal with a single conversation. But we started. The next morning I called Samuel. He arrived within the hour, his briefcase packed with legal pads and his mind already working through the implications of everything we had discovered. Grace came shortly after, bringing the folder marked Phase 2 that Margaret had left in the safe. We spread everything across my dining room table, the same table where Vanessa had once laid out her floor plans, and we began to build the case that would end her. Samuel worked with methodical precision. First, the forged power of attorney, with Daniel's testimony confirming he had witnessed a different document than the one filed with the county. Then, Grace's recording from the funeral, Vanessa's own voice condemning her with casual cruelty. The Ohio court records came next, 15 years of buried history that proved this was not an isolated incident, but a pattern, a career built on exploiting elderly victims. Daniel provided the original documents he had secretly preserved, showing clearly how the filed versions had been altered. And finally, Margaret's video, her face thin but her eyes fierce, explaining exactly what she had discovered and why she had prepared these defenses. "This is substantial," Samuel said when we had finished organizing everything. "The pattern of behavior across state lines elevates this significantly. Elder financial exploitation is a felony in New York, and the Ohio history shows premeditation and repeat offense. The district attorney's office will take this seriously." He submitted the package that afternoon. I expected weeks of waiting, the slow grind of bureaucracy that accompanies most legal matters. Instead, Samuel called me 2 days later with news that made my heart quicken. "They've assigned a senior prosecutor," he said. "Given the interstate nature of the crimes and the documented pattern, the case has been flagged for priority review. They're moving fast, Roland. Faster than I've seen in 30 years of practice." On the third day, Vanessa received an official summons. I wasn't there to see her face when it arrived, but Daniel told me about it later. She had gone pale, he said. Her hands had trembled as she read the document. For the first time in their marriage, she had nothing to say. Daniel came to see me that evening. He stood in my doorway, looking older than his 40 years, the weight of everything he had participated in visible in the lines around his eyes, the slump of his shoulders. He didn't ask to come in. He just stood there, gathering words that seemed to cost him everything to speak. "I'm sorry, Dad." His voice cracked on the last word. "I'm sorry for the papers I witnessed. I'm sorry for standing by while she manipulated you. I'm sorry for not being strong enough to stop her sooner. I'm sorry for every time I chose her over you, every time I stayed silent when I should have spoken up." He swallowed hard, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "I'm not asking you to forgive me. I know I don't deserve that. I just needed to say the words." I looked at my son, this man I had raised, this man I had loved and been disappointed by in equal measure. The anger was still there, buried deep alongside the grief of knowing how close I had come to losing everything. But beneath all of that, something else remained. Something that felt like the first green shoots pushing through scorched earth. "I don't forgive you yet," I said honestly. "Maybe I will someday. Maybe I won't. But I see you trying, Daniel. I see you choosing differently. That's enough for now." He nodded, accepting the partial absolution without complaint. He knew, as I did, that trust once broken takes years to rebuild. We had made a beginning. The rest would require time neither of us could rush. Vanessa called that night. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up some need to hear how she would play her final cards. Her voice came through the phone, thick with tears, trembling with what sounded like genuine anguish. "Roland, please, you have to understand. Daniel forced me into everything. He was the one who wanted your money. He pressured me to help him, threaten me when I refused. I was just trying to keep my family together. I was a victim too." I listened to the performance, recognizing every note, every carefully crafted sob. This was the same act she had used on Charles Hartwell's family, the same desperate pivot to victimhood that had worked well enough to buy her a settlement and a sealed record. She was good at it. She had practiced for years, but I had seen behind the curtain now, and the magic no longer worked. "I've heard that performance before," I said calmly. "Charles Hartwell's family heard it too. The difference is, they didn't have a recording of you bragging about what you planned to do. They didn't have your husband ready to testify against you, and they didn't have a dead woman's video explaining exactly who you are." Silence on the other end. Not the silence of someone gathering arguments, but the silence of someone who has finally run out of moves. "Goodbye, Vanessa." I hung up before she could respond and set the phone down with a steadiness that surprised me. It was over. Not the legal process, which would grind on for months, but the battle itself. She had lost, and she knew it, and nothing she could say or do would change the outcome now. Grace arrived the next morning, the Phase 2 folder tucked under her arm. She had read through its contents the night before, following Margaret's instructions that only she should review it first. Now she sat across from me at the kitchen table, her expression unreadable, the folder resting between us like a door waiting to be opened. "Roland, there's one more thing Margaret prepared," she said quietly. "Something I don't think even you expected." "What do you mean?" Grace opened the folder, spreading its contents across the table. "Financial statements, investment portfolios, property deeds from 3 different states, numbers that made my eyes widen as I began to understand what I was seeing." "The penthouse was never the real prize," Grace said, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "It was the bait. Margaret knew Vanessa would fixate on it, knew it would become the center of her schemes. So she made it visible, prominent, impossible to ignore." She tapped the documents in front of me. Meanwhile, she built something else entirely, something Vanessa never knew existed. I stared at the papers at the scale of what Margaret had quietly assembled over decades of careful planning. "Wait until you see what she actually left Olivia." The documents spread across my table told a story I had never known existed. Margaret, practical, careful. Margaret had been building something extraordinary for decades, and she had done it so quietly that even I, her husband of 43 years, had no idea of its scope. Grace walked me through the portfolio piece by piece. Investment accounts opened 30 years ago, funded with small amounts that grew steadily through compound interest and shrewd market timing. Municipal bonds purchased when interest rates were high, now worth 3 times their original value. Real estate holdings in 2 other states, modest properties bought during market downturns and rented out through a management company I had never heard of. Stock positions in blue-chip companies, dividend reinvestment plans that had been accumulating shares for longer than Daniel had been alive. Margaret started this before you were married, Grace explained. Our parents left us each a small inheritance when they died. I spent mine. Margaret invested hers and never touched it again. She added to it whenever she could, a little here, a little there, always careful, always patient. I stared at the numbers, struggling to comprehend what I was seeing. The Penthouse, the asset Vanessa had spent years scheming to acquire, was worth approximately $2 million, a substantial sum by any measure, but the hidden trust Grace was showing me, the invisible empire Margaret had built in silence, was worth over $8 million. She never told me, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. She never told anyone except Samuel and me. That was the point. Grace leaned forward, her eyes bright with something that looked like admiration. Margaret understood something most people never learn. Visible wealth attracts predators. The penthouse, the comfortable retirement, the lifestyle you two lived together, all of that was real, but also served another purpose. It was the shiny object, the obvious target. Anyone who wanted to exploit you would focus on what they could see. The strategy became clear in my mind, elegant in its simplicity. Margaret had created a decoy without even realizing she would need one. When Vanessa entered our lives, when she began her slow, patient campaign to position herself for inheritance, she had fixed her attention on the assets she could observe. The penthouse, the savings accounts, the investments she knew about from family conversations. She had built her entire scheme around capturing those visible prizes, never suspecting that the real fortune existed in a parallel world she couldn't access. The trust is structured with multiple layers of protection, Grace continued. Samuel and I are co-trustees along with you. No single person can access the funds without agreement from the others. The beneficiary is Olivia, and only Olivia, with distributions beginning when she turns 25. Until then, the money remains untouchable, except for approved educational and medical expenses. I thought about Vanessa, about her years of manipulation, her forged documents, her careful cultivation of my son's weakness. She had invested more than a decade of her life in this scheme, had married a man she didn't love, had raised a child as a strategic asset. All of it aimed at a penthouse worth $2 million, while $8 million sat in accounts she would never see, protected by trusts she could never break, managed by people she had never known existed. She wasted everything, I said slowly. Her time, her energy, her entire life's work, all of it for nothing. Grace nodded. Margaret wanted it that way. She told me once near the end that the best revenge against a thief is to let them steal an empty box while the real treasure sits somewhere else entirely. Vanessa got exactly what Margaret planned for her to get. Nothing. The following days brought a cascade of consequences. Samuel informed Vanessa's attorney of the trust's existence, providing documentation that made clear the futility of any legal challenge. The penthouse was irrevocably designated for Olivia. The hidden portfolio was beyond any claim Vanessa could make. Even the forged power of attorney, had it succeeded, would have given her control over accounts that contained a fraction of the family's true wealth. Every path she might have taken led to the same destination, an empty room with no exit. I wasn't present when Vanessa received the news, but Samuel described the conversation to me later. Her attorney had called her into his office, laid out the documents Grace had provided, and explained in precise legal terms that there was nothing left to fight for. The assets she had targeted didn't exist in any form she could access. The schemes she had built, the manipulations she had executed, the years she had invested, all of it had been aimed at a mirage. She had reportedly sat in silence for a long time, staring at papers that represented the complete collapse of everything she had worked for. Then, according to her attorney, she had asked a single question: "What do I have left?" The answer came in a series of formal notifications delivered over the next 48 hours. Daniel's divorce filing arrived first, citing irreconcilable differences and requesting full custody of Olivia pending investigation of her mother's fitness as a parent. The petition included references to the forged documents, the Ohio history, and the pattern of manipulation that had characterized their entire marriage. Vanessa would have 30 days to vacate the family residence, a house that had been purchased with money from my accounts, money she had assumed would eventually be hers. The district attorney's summons arrived the same day, a formal request for her appearance to discuss matters related to the Ohio case and the New York charges pending against her. The pattern of elder financial exploitation, documented across 2 states and spanning 15 years, had caught the attention of prosecutors who specialized in exactly this kind of predatory behavior. She would not be facing a civil settlement this time. She would be facing criminal charges. I learned about these developments through Samuel, who received updates from colleagues involved in the case. He called me on the 5th day after the revelations, his voice carrying a satisfaction I rarely heard from him. "Her attorney just contacted me," he said. "He wanted to know if there was any possibility of negotiation, any way to reduce the charges in exchange for cooperation. I told him what the district attorney told me." Samuel paused, and I could almost hear him smiling through the phone. "Mrs. Pierce, your husband has filed for divorce. You have 30 days to vacate the family residence, and the district attorney would like to discuss the Ohio matter at your earliest convenience." 1 month passed, then 2. The legal machinery ground forward with its own relentless momentum, and I watched from a distance as the life Vanessa had built collapsed piece by piece. The charges came first: forgery in the 2nd degree, attempted grand larceny, elder financial exploitation. Each count carried its own weight, its own potential consequences, and together they painted a picture that no amount of tears or performances could erase. The Ohio case had been reopened as well, prosecutors there coordinating with their New York counterparts to establish the pattern of predatory behavior that spanned 15 years and 2 states. Vanessa's attorney negotiated where he could, but there was little room to maneuver. The evidence was overwhelming. The witnesses were credible. And this time, there would be no quiet settlement, no sealed records, no convenient disappearance into a new identity. She had lost everything. Her marriage dissolved in a divorce that Daniel pursued with unexpected determination. Her reputation shattered by court filings that became public record. Her freedom to scheme constrained by legal supervision that would follow her for years. The predator who had walked into my penthouse demanding keys now faced a future defined by consequences she had never imagined possible. I took no pleasure in her suffering, but I felt no guilt about it either. Some prices must be paid. Daniel moved into a small apartment across town, a modest place with secondhand furniture and bare walls that he was slowly learning to call home. He saw Olivia every weekend, supervised at first by a court-appointed monitor, then gradually with more independence as he proved himself capable of putting his daughter's needs before his own. He had started therapy, confronting the patterns of weakness and avoidance that had made him vulnerable to Vanessa's manipulation. He had found a job, nothing glamorous, just honest work that paid enough to cover rent and left him tired in a way that felt earned rather than depleted. And he had stopped drinking one day at a time, building a sobriety that was still fragile but growing stronger. We talked every weekend now, my son and I. Not long conversations, not yet. The trust between us remained thin, easily strained. But we were trying. We were both trying. And sometimes when he laughed at something Olivia said or asked my advice about a problem at work, I caught glimpses of the boy he used to be, the boy who might still be there underneath all the damage. Olivia spent most weekends at the Penthouse with me. Children are resilient in ways adults forget, their hearts capable of healing from wounds that would scar us forever. She missed her mother, of course. She didn't understand everything that had happened, and I didn't try to explain it all. There would be time for that later, when she was older, when the letter Margaret had left for her 18th birthday could finally be opened. For now, I simply loved her. I made her breakfast and helped with her homework and listened to her stories about school and friends and the small dramas of a 9-year-old's world. She asked about her grandmother constantly. Every night before bed, she wanted another story, another memory, another piece of the woman she had barely known. I told her about Margaret's orchids, her Sunday mornings by the window, the way she laughed at my terrible jokes. I told her about the early years, the struggling years, the years when we had nothing but each other, and somehow that was enough. I told her that her grandmother had loved her more than anything, had prepared for her future with a devotion that transcended death itself. And sometimes, when I finished talking and Olivia's eyes grew heavy with sleep, I could almost feel Margaret in the room, with us listening, smiling at peace. Grace had become a regular presence in our lives. She came for dinner twice a week, stayed for coffee and conversation, helped me understand the sister I had never known my wife had. We didn't try to replace what had been lost, the 20 years of silence, the family that might have been. Instead, we built something new from the broken pieces, a connection forged in crisis and strengthened by shared purpose. On a quiet evening in early spring, I found the second letter Margaret had left for me. It had been tucked inside the Phase 2 folder, overlooked in the chaos of revelations, waiting patiently for the moment when I would be ready to read it. I opened it alone, sitting in her chair by the window, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. "My dearest Roland," she had written, "if you're reading this, it's over. You won, not because you're clever, though you are, not because you're strong, though you've always been stronger than you knew. You won because you're good. You've always been good in ways you never gave yourself credit for. That's what I loved most about you. That's what I'll always love." The letter continued for another page, words of tenderness and farewell. But it was the final line that broke me open. "Live your peace now, Roland. You've earned it, earned." I sat by the window as darkness gathered outside, the letter pressed against my heart. Olivia had fallen asleep on the couch beside me, her breathing soft and steady. One hand curled beneath her cheek. Grace sat in Margaret's favorite chair, reading quietly, her presence a comfort I hadn't known I needed. The city lights flickered on one by one, a constellation of lives being lived in the gathering night. I looked at Margaret's photograph on the mantel, at the face I had loved for more than half my life, and I whispered words I knew she could hear. "We did it, my love. She's safe. They're all safe." Outside, the world continued its turning, indifferent to the small victories and quiet redemptions taking place in a penthouse high above the streets. But inside these walls, something precious had been preserved. Margaret's dream, my promise, Olivia's future. For the first time in years, I felt something I had forgotten existed: peace. Every story of betrayal carries within it the seeds of something greater. Roland Pierce did not seek revenge. He sought protection. He sought truth. And in the end, he found something far more valuable than justice. He found peace. Margaret's love reached beyond the grave to shield the people she cherished most. Her careful planning, her quiet preparations, her faith in the goodness of the man she married. All of it came together in a moment when it mattered most. She could not stop Vanessa herself, but she built a fortress that no predator could breach. That is the power of love that refuses to surrender even to death. Daniel's journey reminds us that redemption is always possible for those willing to do the hard work of change. He was weak, yes. He made terrible choices, but when the moment came, he chose his father over his fear. He chose truth over comfort, and in doing so, he began the long road back to the man he was always meant to be. As for Olivia, she will grow up surrounded by people who love her genuinely, who will teach her that family is not about what you can take, but about what you choose to give. If this story moved you, I would love to hear your thoughts. What would you have done in Roland's place? Could you have forgiven Daniel? Share your answers in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this journey, please subscribe for more stories of justice, redemption, and the quiet strength that carries us through our darkest hours.